My name is Zara Lockhart. I am 35 years old, an Air Force officer assigned as an operations and maintenance liaison at Andrews. I keep aircraft honest, pilots safer, and my past under wraps. The morning the hangar went silent, I was wiping oil from an F22's access panel, listening to the hum of fans and distant ground power units. Metal smelled like rain, jet fuel bit the back of my throat. The checklist on my tablet flicked green, line after line, predictable, factual, unemotional. Boot steps cut across the concrete. My father, Colonel Marcus Lockhart, filled the doorway with shoulders squared and jaw set for a fight. He didn't greet me. He tossed his hard hat onto the steel table. It hit with a ringing slap that turned heads. "A mechanic can't fly," he shouted, voice ricocheting off ribs and rivets. He jabbed at the Raptor's nose. "Into the cockpit. Prove it, or take off the uniform." My ears didn't ring, they narrowed. Training does that, shrinks the world to what matters. I set the rag down, slid the ladder close, and climbed without an extra breath. I didn't argue. I buckled to data and procedures, not to his temper. The canopy smelled faintly of sealant and glass. I eased into the seat, fingers mapping switches I've known for years by muscle memory I never advertise. When I reached for the harness, my sleeve rode up. The colonel, our wing commander, not my father, stood 2 steps left of the ladder, halfway through a comment to maintenance control. His words stalled. His eyes locked on my wrist. The world thinned to that exposed mark, ink dark against skin. TG-0717. Top gun, he whispered. The nearest crew chief froze mid-hand signal. A wrench clinked once on the floor. Somewhere, a coffee cup stopped halfway to someone's mouth. The fans kept turning but felt far away. The hangar inhaled and did not exhale. Across the concrete, my dad's boots didn't move. His face drained. His jaw dropped in a way I'd never seen in a man who believed control was oxygen. For 12 years he called what I do fixing, as if I were patching a fence. The colonel looked from my wrist to my eyes, searching past coveralls and oil for an answer I had no intention of offering aloud. He had enough. TG-0717. Not rumor, not borrowed valor. Ink from a summer in Nevada when I learned to think 3 moves ahead at mock. I closed my hand over the tattoo and finished the buckle. My heart stayed steady, but it beat where I could hear it, the hollow under my ear where a headset sits. The comm cart clicked live outside. Ground called for a radio check. I answered by habit, voice level, name withheld. My father found air. "This is insane," he said to the room, not to me. "A mechanic can't fly." He repeated it softer, like trying to convince physics to sit down. The colonel didn't raise his voice. "Tower needs a 4th seat for the SAR intercept. We're out of time." He gave me a single nod that weighed more than any speech. It was permission and test at once. I looked at engine instruments dead and calm. I looked at the runway through a wedge of hangar light. I looked at the man who taught me to tie my shoes like knots and who forgot that courage can speak quietly. "I'll follow the book," I said, mostly to myself. Procedure over pride. Evidence over anger. If I flew, I would fly clean. Outside, someone finally exhaled. Noise returned, a fan, a radio, a tug beeping reverse. I lowered the visor and let the glass erase everything but the work. In my periphery, my father was still stone. The colonel's pupils were steady and bright. If you need a headline for that minute, it is the one they printed later without asking me. "A mechanic can't fly," my dad shouted, forcing me into the cockpit. Then my sleeve rolled up. The colonel whispered, "TG-0717, top gun." The entire base went silent. My dad's jaw dropped. It sounds dramatic because it was, but inside the cockpit the drama condensed into numbers and flows and checklists. Inside the cockpit, I was not a daughter. I was a pilot no one planned for, and a secret no one could stuff back into a sleeve. I set my palms on my thighs to still them. They were already still. The engines were cold iron. The air smelled like the start of a storm. "Zara," the colonel said at last, name bare, rank omitted. "Say when you're ready." I took one breath and answered, "Now, sir." The harness kissed my collarbones as I tightened it. Ground crew thumbs rose, my hands moved with them, batteries on, APU, screens alive. Nothing mystical, just small obediences done in order. Shadow 4, radio check, the colonel said on interflight. Shadow 4, loud and clear, I answered. Tower cleared us. The hangar's bright rectangle slid across the canopy like a curtain parting on a stage I had sworn off. I kept the scan steady, temps, pressures, hydraulics, tying myself to the present. At the edge of sight, my father stood near the steel table, staring at the floor as if answers lived in the oil sheen. I had trained not to chase that gaze. Today, it chased me. I let it pass through. We held short at the arming area. Engines idled at a patient growl. The sensations you remember are small. Harness creak, fan tick, the tap of a pen because hands hate idle. Shadow 4, confirm flight status, Tower asked. Skepticism audible. Emergency authorization per wing, I said. The colonel acknowledged. The frequency flattened. Questions would wait. The clock would not. Orders read simple. Locate, protect, guide, rescue, come home with the living. No metal in that. Just letters avoided. Taxi center line strobed under the nose. A kid behind base ops glass lifted a phone. Viral moments are sugar highs. Airplanes do not care about applause. Lockhart, the colonel said low. No theatrics. Do the work. That's the plan, I said. Exact beats brave. Exact holds the stick at neutral until physics deserve more. Lined up, I waited for the final light. A touch of crosswind nudged the rudder. I imagined the sky cool and clear. Shadow 4, cleared immediate, Tower said. Copy. Throttles up. The jet hummed. The runway came to me. In the takeoff roll, the world collapses to needle flicker and paint stripe. Then it expands like breath. I kept the expansion at the edge of vision. Rotating, I glanced at the hangar. My father was a rigid shape. He used to check my laces before track meets. He used to clap once when I cleared a bar. The man who loved beginnings forgot how to watch continuance. There is grief in that, but not the kind that earns a day off. Gear up, climb, hand off. Mission data slid onto the glass. A grid, a coordinate string. A sliver of forest that could hide or shelter depending on how quickly you arrive. My story didn't start here. Years ago, I stepped sideways when forward was blocked by politics and a bad outcome that wasn't mine alone. I buried the pilot under coveralls and called it wisdom. The jet didn't care. Machines remember without judgment. On interflight, the colonel gave vectors and rescue timing. I repeated them, trimmed a hair to take the bump out. The cabin smelled drier above 3,000 feet. Below, the base shrank into geometry. From up here, the hangar was a gray stamp. My father, a dot inside a dot. I tried to predict his version of this morning, that he forced me, unmasked me, finally made me obey. The stories would make him taller. I let him keep posture. I kept truth. We crossed a river and brown fields. The fight in me cooled to something sustainable. Not heat, not ice, a blue pilot light. The colonel fed updates. I answered without ornament. Clarity wastes fewer seconds than anger. If you listen for anger, you miss what this is. The start of a ledger balancing. Not fire, but form, line by line, until numbers stop wobbling. At altitude, the sky took on that high, empty sound that makes you feel like a pencil drawing on a white page. I liked that as a kid. From outline, you can be redrawn. The brief spooled through me. Search grids, ID protocols, comm windows. The romance is for runway photos. Out here, you respect small things executed well. They add into survival. I checked the clock and marked the first turn. South, then east, then south again, threading a needle through dark cloth. The needle is small. The stitch holds lives. I did not look back. The story could chase me later. For now, there was the work and the thin line it offered between loss and return. Search and rescue is not glamorous. If we failed, someone would deliver a letter and a bag of folded flags. If we succeeded, no one would trend. That is the bargain I respect. You show up with competence and leave with silence. The first waypoint blinked alive steadily on the HUD, a green promise. It felt like taking a test I studied for in the dark. Answers, reasons withheld. I breathed once, counted 3, and let the jet's patience become my own. The radio hissed, and then a clipped voice came through, urgency wrapped in static. Backup pilot admitted to the hospital. Shadow flight 1 ship short. Immediate launch required. The words folded into my headset like orders written in lightning. No one asked who I was. No one asked why I knew the startup flow. They only cared that one cockpit sat cold and empty, while men waited for rescue in a forest that didn't forgive delays. I felt my throat tighten, not with fear, but with the weight of inevitability. I had studied, drilled, memorized every contour of this cockpit for years in silence. The chance came not with applause, but with necessity. I didn't volunteer. Necessity conscripted me. Shadow 4, stand by for ignition sequence, the controller barked. My hand hovered over the switches, steady. The hangar was gone. There was only the checklist running in my veins. Battery, on. The hum filled the cabin like the first intake of breath after being held underwater. Avionics, alive, screens brightening one by one. Fuel flow checked, pumps green. I whispered the calls to myself, more ritual than instruction. Every click of a switch was a syllable of a language I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Outside, the ground crew stared like witnesses at a trial no one predicted. A sergeant mouthed something, maybe a prayer, maybe disbelief. My father remained frozen at the edge of the hangar, as if moving would confirm the nightmare he had just seen. His daughter, where only sons, only chosen men, were supposed to sit. Tower confirms launch authorization, the colonel's voice cut through, firm, final. Zara, proceed. The use of my name anchored me. For 12 years it had been airman, mechanic, or you. Hearing Zara in that calm, authoritative tone sealed the moment. No turning back. I reached for the throttles. The F22 shuddered awake. The engines spun, a rising whine swelling into a growl that vibrated through the seat, through my ribs. Heat shimmered across the tarmac. Ground power carts rattled with the surge. The Raptor was no longer a machine. It was a pulse synced with mine. Checklists marched forward. Hydraulics, pressures stable. Oxygen, flow confirmed. Flight controls, free and correct. My sleeve brushed the tattoo again. And though I kept my eyes forward, I felt the colonel still watching, still remembering that whisper. Top Gun. Shadow 4, taxi, Tower ordered. I released the brakes. The jet rolled, nose weaving down the yellow line, the hangar falling away behind me. Through the canopy, I caught a final glimpse of my father. He wasn't shouting anymore. His hands hung useless at his sides. I wondered if he realized the irony. All his years preaching that I could not and now I must. The urgency pressed harder with each foot of taxiway. The rest of Shadow Flight was already spooling. 3 Raptors waiting like wolves at the runway's mouth. Their formation needed a 4th. Rescue needed 4 wings tight together, not 3. Lockhart, acknowledge readiness, the colonel demanded on interflight. Shadow 4 ready, I replied, voice level. The syllables felt surreal. I wasn't borrowing a call sign anymore. I was living it. The tower's tone sharpened. Shadow Flight cleared immediate scramble. Search and rescue priority. Survivors in hostile terrain. Time on station critical. That last phrase, time on station critical, carried the vertical spike. Somewhere out there, people were bleeding, waiting, minutes away from vanishing into casualty lists. Lives balanced on my competence, not on anyone's approval. No argument could be louder than that truth. The lead Raptor thundered forward, nose lifting. Afterburners carving daylight into heat. 2 followed, then it was my turn. I pushed the throttles into military power. The jet roared, the runway streaked beneath me, numbers climbing, control surfaces biting the air. At 140 knots, I eased back. The nose lifted. Wheels left Earth. The cockpit filled with vibration and freedom. The base shrank below, my father now invisible. The colonel's voice steadied in my ear. Shadow 4, airborne. I joined the formation, sliding into the open slot like I had been rehearsing for this day in secret. In truth, I had. The line was complete. 4 Raptors turned east, wings glinting in the sun, a cross of steel over fragile ground. My pulse slowed into rhythm with the jet. Fear had no place here. Neither did doubt. The mission had started, and once it started, there was only forward. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the click of a lock turning. The moment when past denial gave way to present reality. I wasn't pretending, I wasn't hiding. I was the fourth ship in shadow flight, and the ledger of my life had a new entry. I whispered, unheard beneath the roar, "For once, Dad, watch me." The wheels left the ground, the tremor of asphalt faded, and the silence of altitude took over. I pulled the landing gear lever, felt the thunk of retraction beneath my feet, and let the jet climb, nose slicing into blue. My breath came steady, but I knew, down there, on the ground, breathing was anything but calm. Within seconds, the chatter began. The base's internal comms, usually reserved for operational calls, were alive with side-channel noise. "Did anyone authorize this?" a controller whispered, his voice bleeding across the frequency. Another snapped back, "Authorized or not, she's airborne. You want to call her down in the middle of a scramble?" The tower cut in, trying to keep order. "Shadow flight, proceed to mission vector, maintain calm discipline." But beneath that order, the storm gathered. I could feel it, even at 30 feet, then 300, then 3,000. My name was already a spark in dry grass. Zara Lockhart, the mechanic who'd spent 12 years crawling beneath fuselages, was now strapped into an F22 streaking east. And everyone had an opinion. Some voices rose sharp with condemnation. "This is reckless. She isn't certified. We'll be court-martialing the colonel before dawn." Others spat cynicism. "She's a stunt, a liability. We've put an untested wrench-turner in the deadliest jet on Earth." But there were counter-voices too, hushed but growing. "She knew the startup sequence cold. Did you hear her checklists? That wasn't guesswork." Another admitted, almost grudgingly, "You saw the tattoo. That wasn't decoration, that was designation. TG-0717. Someone groomed her for this." The base divided in real time, lines drawn not in policy but in instinct. Some clung to the rules, others to the evidence of their eyes. A mechanic had done the impossible, taken flight when no one else could. I glanced at my wingman, Shadow 3, sliding into position off my right shoulder. His voice crackled in my headset, low but distinct. "Lockhart, you fly like you've been here before." I didn't answer. The less I spoke, the more the silence said. Down below, I imagined the command post, screens glowing, officers leaning over desks, clerks frozen with pens half lifted. My father would still be on the tarmac, jaw locked, unwilling to move lest someone see him stagger. For 12 years, he had preached the barrier between what I did and what he did. Now the barrier had evaporated in jet wash. A female voice pierced through, higher up the chain, clipped with fury. "Who signed off on this?" the colonel answered, steady, immovable. "I did." "You'll answer for it." "Maybe, but not before she answers the call." That line would echo, I knew, not just in that room, but in the days to come. A defense, a defiance, a wager on me. As the jet leveled into climb, the landscape spread beneath like an open file, rivers, roads, fields shrinking into pattern. My headset carried the faint sound of controllers debating policy while trying to sound professional. To the men and women with no voice in the decision, it was simpler. They looked up from the motor pool, from the barracks, from the chow line, and saw contrails slicing skyward. A rumor turned legend in minutes. The mechanic was flying. I imagined the cafeteria erupting, spoons clattering, conversations colliding. "She's in the Raptor," someone shouted. And the younger ones, those who still believed rules bent under truth, grinned like they'd just seen the world flip upright for the first time. But disbelief was just as sharp. "Mark my words," one master sergeant muttered, "when she crashes, every one of us will wear the stain." And maybe that was the point of friction, the line between faith and fear, between believing a lifetime of tradition or believing the evidence of a single moment, between rules written in manuals and rules rewritten in blood and survival. In my canopy reflection, I caught my own eyes. They didn't look afraid. They looked resolved. I wasn't here to prove them wrong. I was here because someone's clock was running out in the wilderness, and there were only 4 jets in this world that could make it there in time. I just happened to be in one of them. The colonel broke the growing silence on the mission net. "Shadow flight, Titan formation. Base chatter is irrelevant. Mission is primary." His words steadied the channel, but I knew, back at base, it was far from quiet. Papers would be flying, tempers flaring, careers balancing on the edge of whether I came back alive. The F22 cut through cloud. Sunlight flared off the canopy. I adjusted trim, let the jet settle into climb. Behind me, the base disappeared beneath a veil of distance. But the noise, the opinions, the factions, they would not disappear so easily. Up here, though, there was only the mission. And the mission didn't care who hated me or who secretly cheered. The mission didn't care that I had grease under my nails yesterday and a control stick under my palm today. The mission only cared if I got there. My fingers settled on the throttle a ton, as the forest rose like dark surf beneath our nose. The colonel gave us a gentle left to line up with the last coordinates, then went quiet. I pushed my scan wider. Radar return, terrain lines, wind aloft. The map painted a green-black lattice of pines and granite. Somewhere in that pattern, a pilot was breathing through pain and time. "Downed bird, this is Shadow 4, I said on guard. Authenticate Bravo 2. A ragged voice came back, thin with effort. "Shadow, copy, Bravo 2 gold. Shoulders out, I can't move far. Dislocation distorts the world. You start negotiating against your own body." I kept my voice level. "We've got you, stay under cover. Do not try to self-extract." I toggled the radar to a high-resolution mapping mode. Top Gun drilled a truth into us. Read the ground like a room. Corners first, exits second, threats always. I swept for flat signatures, shadowless patches where blades could spin without becoming confetti. Most of the valley was a comb of teeth. But to the southeast, a lighter smear winked in the SAR image. Irregular, elongated, about 60 meters, ringed by deadfall. "Potential LZ, grid 587 by 219, I called. "Colonel, request we mark and verify." "Approved. 2 and 3, stay high cover. 4, run the glass." Wind knifed across the ridge. I eased a descent, not enough to risk the canopy, enough to sharpen the red. My hands did what they always do when the stakes turn real, small, exact movements, energy in the thinking, not the stick. "Downed bird," I said. "Can you activate beacon momentarily?" "Negative on shoulder. I can toggle it with my boot." "Stand by." Static, a grunt. Then the soft ping on my scope jumped 3 degrees left of the last mark. Good. He still had fight. I plotted a curved ingress for the rescue helo, let the course lines snap into place. Trees leaned downhill. Rotors would need a run-in from the south to avoid vortex in the bowl. At 8,000, I could taste smoke, faint and sour. Lightning had nicked this valley earlier in the week. Fire is a second enemy, makes you hurry and makes you dumb. I slowed my breathing and let the jet slow with it. "Colonel," I said, "recommending LZ Sierra, coordinates uploading. Slope under 5 degrees, canopy broken, deadfall on the north edge only. Helicopter approach from 180, depart 005. I'll hold overwatch on the western ridge." "Copy Sierra, rescue is 5 minutes out. 4, keep your altitude margin." "Affirm." I skimmed the ridgeline without touching the speed brakes, keeping the nose clean. Below, the clearing showed itself in flashes through needles. Lighter soil scar, a scatter of bleached trunks, grass laid by last winter's melt. "Downed bird?" I asked. "Visual on a break in the canopy east-southeast of you?" "Can't raise my head, but I can hear water." I checked the topo overlay. A creek braided the clearing's edge. "That tracks," I said. "Hold, copy." We were a minute early on timeline. I spent it on contingencies. If wind boxed the helo in, I had space to drag lead from the west. If smoke thickened, I could steer with headings alone. Top Gun's rule of 3 options kept its promise. Fear lives in singular plans. Shadow 2's voice slid in, dry. 4, that's a tight bowl. Tight, not fatal. Breezes crosstail on approach. Shifts to headwind in the last 10 yards. They'll like the last 10 yards. Copy. From altitude, decision-making feels like drawing a straight line through a crowded room without bumping shoulders. On the ground, it's about inches. I owed inches to a pilot biting down on his tongue somewhere under green. "Rescue inbound 2 minutes, the colonel reported. "Mark Sierra." I pulsed a covert laser on the clearing's edge for the helo's sensors, then throttled back to keep noise off the valley. I kept talking so the downed pilot wouldn't fall into the blank space pain makes. "What's your name?" I asked. "Rodriguez," he said, breath hissing. "Alex." "Copy, Alex, I'm Zara. You're not alone." Static. Then, faint humor. "You the mechanic?" "I'm the fourth seat today." He laughed once, and it broke in the middle. "Rescue visual," the colonel announced. A dark dot skimmed low along the creek, then grew shoulders and legs, a helicopter hugging terrain. I tightened my turn, watched for gust snakes in the grass, watched the tops of the pines to see wind for what it was, not what the gauges said. The helo flared, committed, and the clearing accepted it like a held breath finally let go. Its rotors carved a neat oval of dust and pollen as medics spilled out fast. Medics ran low under the rotor wash, green shapes against the pale dust, and I kept my orbit measured, wings level, nose a hair high to gain time if the engine burped. Shadow 2, hold east at 8500. 3, take north at 10. Keep the bowl clean. I marked their arcs on the display and fed the helo a steady wind call. 185 at 12, gusting 16. Commit now or wave. The pilot committed. The skid kissed dirt, settled, wobbled, held. On the mission net, the colonel said nothing, which meant everything. He was listening to me work. So was the whole flight. I walked the medics through route and distance like counting out beads. 50 meters to your 2 o'clock, intermittent brush, creek on your left. LZ is marginal, expedite. Copy, someone grunted below. A minute later, a shape moved in the shadows. Visual on the survivor, one medic called. I kept the turn smooth, altitude steady. The threat wasn't enemy fire, it was mistakes bred by adrenaline. Shadow 4, Shadow 3 asked, curiosity tucked into formality. "When did you learn to read thermal terrain like that?" My eyes stayed outside. I read enough to do my job. The line landed flat and sharp at once. The colonel let it pass, but I could feel the question multiplying across headsets. Who taught her this? Where did she practice? Why is the mechanic speaking like a controller and a flight lead had a daughter? Below, the medics reached Rodriguez. The rotor disc flashed in sun. Physics waiting. "Advise sling or carry?" a medic asked. Carry, I said. "Sling will eat your margin in this wind." Shadow 2 cleared his throat. 4, you calling the helos game now? "Calling the wind," I replied. "They can ignore me." They didn't. 2 medics braced Rodriguez's arm, counting off the lift. The helo settled a fraction deeper into dust. "Downed bird aboard," the pilot came back, voice tight with workload. "Departing Sierra." "Depart on 005, I said. "Wind will square you up by the creek." Shadow 3, escort them to the ridge gap. "Copy," 3 said, and slid ahead like a dark blade. I stole a second to breathe. Suspicion crackled on frequencies I couldn't hear. I kept my circle and my mind inside 10 miles. Miles save lives, not arguments. The helo pulled power, lightened, drifted a finger width left, then righted. It clawed forward. Dust fell away. Once clear of the treetops, it accelerated along the creek, rotors biting clean air. "Rescue outbound," the colonel said at last. "Shadow flight, form on 4 for egress." He put me on the point. That choice told the base enough. I banked west, slow enough that the helo's escort could tuck in, fast enough to keep our timeline honest. A private voice slid onto our side channel, one of the younger pilots, hushed and disbelieving. "Sir, is she who I think she is?" "Eyes out," the colonel answered. "Questions later." But questions were already building a case. Aircrew gossip is a courtroom with no judge. Someone would ask for paperwork. Someone would say the word insubordination. Someone would write their opening statement before I touched down. We cleared the ridge and the radio noise thinned. The helo called altitude and fuel. I answered with headings and winds, a metronome to keep panic from picking the notes. "Mechanic," Shadow 2 said again, lighter this time. "You ever gonna tell us where you learned to talk like that?" "After we get him home," I said. "Copy." When we handed the helo to approach, the valley folded closed behind us like a book allowed to end a chapter. I rolled level, trimmed out, and watched our shadow run along fields stitched brown and green. The mission hadn't loved our debates. It loved that we were timely. "Shadow flight," the colonel said. "Nice work." Praise sat strange in my ears, like a room I hadn't entered in years. I didn't need it, but I recognized the gift in his restraint. He was choosing facts over rumors, as I had. Before we switched back to tower, the younger voice returned, softer. Whoever you are for, thanks. Do your job, I said, and meant it for myself first. Approach took us, then tower, then the familiar cadence of home. From altitude, the base looked harmless, like lines a child might draw and color in. Inside those lines waited people with pens and opinions, and both could cut. Shadow 4, tower called. Expect straight in. Roger, I said. I glanced at the mirror of the canopy, at the faint line of ink beneath my sleeve. Suspicion could grow all it wanted. The man in the back of that helicopter was alive, and that was a fact with weight. I set the altimeter bug for pattern altitude and let the jet descend smoothly. No flourish, no victory roll. Work done right doesn't wave, it lands. The runway stretched out like a long gray tongue, heat shimmer rising in the late afternoon. My hands rested steady on the stick as the wheels kissed asphalt. The jet settled with a hiss of rubber and smoke, a smooth landing no one expected from a so-called mechanic. I brought the throttle back, air brakes up, and the aircraft slowed into a rolling hush. But the silence outside wasn't peace, it was pressure. Through the canopy, I saw the line of figures at the edge of the tarmac. Officers, enlisted, ground crew, even a few medics who had hurried over after hearing the chatter. No one hid their stares. Some faces were lit with awe, others tight with suspicion, but every gaze burned. The rumors had landed ahead of me. Shadow 4, clear of active, I reported calmly, voice even. Copy 4. Taxi to North Apron, the tower answered. But there was hesitation in the controller's tone, as though unsure what rank or title to attach to my call sign. I taxied slow, canopy reflecting the sunset. When I cut engines, the whine died, and was replaced by the heavier sound of murmurs, unfiltered, raw. That's Lockhart. She flew the bird. No, she commanded the rescue. She's not even on flight status. The words floated, sharp as glass. I popped the canopy and climbed down, boots touching ground that felt suddenly foreign. My helmet hung at my side, heavy. Across the apron, I caught sight of him, my father. He stood stiff among a cluster of senior officers, his dress uniform immaculate, jaw locked. The colonel was beside him, hands behind his back, eyes narrowed not in anger but in calculation. For a moment, no one moved. The scene felt like a photograph, frozen, airless. Then my crew chief broke it, jogging up with a mix of pride and disbelief. Zara, that was... He caught himself, eyes darting toward the gathering of brass. He saluted instead. I returned the gesture, sharp, deliberate. The salute wasn't for me. It was for the work we'd just done. But the officers weren't saluting back. They were measuring me. A major I barely knew muttered, not quietly. A mechanic in the cockpit? Reckless. Another answered, lower but firm. If she hadn't, Rodriguez would be dead. The argument was starting in plain sight. No one cared if I heard. I walked forward, helmet still in hand, spine straight. My father's eyes followed me. He had the look of a man caught between two truths. The one he'd spoken, a mechanic can't fly, and the one I had just proven. His gaze didn't soften. If anything, it hardened, like stone resisting a tide. Lockhart, the colonel said evenly when I approached. Report. Survivor retrieved, sir. Rescue successful. Aircraft secured. No damage beyond standard wear. His brow flicked, the barest sign he recognized the precision of my words. Acknowledged. But the silence that followed was louder than his reply. Every officer there was waiting for my father to speak. Finally, he did. You disobeyed standing order, he said. His voice carried, meant for everyone to hear. You violated assignment boundaries. I felt the weight of eyes pressing in. My pulse stayed level. I acted under exigent circumstances. The mission required one more aircraft, immediately. I filled that gap. The colonel's gaze flickered to my father, then back to me. He said nothing, but the faint crease in his forehead told me he'd registered my phrasing. Formal, careful, written as if I were already defending myself before a board. My father's jaw tightened. You embarrassed me in front of this base. The words landed heavier than the accusation of insubordination. Embarrassment, not failure, was what cut him. I held his stare. I saved a man in front of this base. The murmurs surged again, split between admiration and unease. A lieutenant near the back whispered, "She's right." Someone else hissed, "She's out of line." The colonel lifted a hand, and the noise dimmed. "Enough." He spoke with finality, though his eyes stayed on me longer than protocol demanded. "Lockhart, stand by for debrief at 1900. "Yes, sir." He turned away, and the officers followed, but my father lingered. For half a breath, his eyes met mine. What I saw there wasn't pride, nor pure anger. It was something harder to name, fear, perhaps, of losing control of the story he had told about me all these years. Then he pivoted sharply and left. I exhaled slow, steady, not letting my shoulders sag. Around me, whispers still flitted like moths in the dark. Some looked at me like a fraud exposed, others like a truth revealed. I didn't correct either. I turned back toward the hangar, helmet under my arm, and walked. The tarmac felt heavier than when I'd taxied out, but my steps did not falter. The base was no longer the same, and neither was I. The summons came at dawn, delivered not by a clerk but by an MP with a sealed folder. He didn't say a word, only tapped the order with 2 fingers and left me at my quarters staring at the envelope. I broke the seal, read the single line that mattered. Report to command chamber, 0800 hours. I knew before I walked through the door who would be waiting. The chamber was colder than the hangar, though no engines hummed here. Flags lined the walls, and the long polished table gleamed under harsh lights. At the head sat the colonel, posture straight as a drawn saber. To his right, my father. He didn't look at me when I entered, his gaze fixed on a spot across the table, as though he'd already decided I wasn't worth seeing. "Lockhart," the colonel said, clipped. "Sit." I did, sliding into the lone chair opposite them. A recorder clicked on somewhere, its red light blinking like a warning. "Yesterday's actions saved a man's life," the colonel began, his voice measured. "But they also raised questions that cannot be ignored. Your flight, your coordination," and he paused, eyes narrowing, "the tattoo." His words landed like a gavel. My sleeve felt suddenly heavier, though the ink beneath my skin had been part of me for years. TGO 7.7. A code that wasn't supposed to be seen here, not like this. "We need an explanation," the colonel continued. "Where did you acquire the designation Top Gun 0717? Who authorized that marking?" The silence stretched. I could feel the tension bending the room. Then my father spoke, his voice colder than the steel chairs. "I submitted the formal request for investigation," he said. For a second, I couldn't breathe. It was him, my own father. The one who had thrown down the words, "A mechanic can't fly," was now the hand pushing the blade deeper. The colonel didn't flinch. "Colonel Lockhart Sr. has raised concerns about misrepresentation. He suggests this tattoo implies unauthorized training or false claim of status." The phrase cut sharper than accusation. False claim. I met my father's eyes. He finally looked at me, but there was no warmth. Only the satisfaction of a man trying to corner what he couldn't control. "I never misrepresented myself," I said evenly. My voice didn't rise. I kept it steady, calm, a counterweight to their storm. "Then explain it," the colonel pressed. "Because yesterday you flew like a graduate. You issued commands like a combat instructor. And you read terrain as if you had a decade in the air. None of that matches your record. The record, the paper life they kept of me, stripped clean of the years that mattered. I did what needed to be done," I said. "I filled the gap when no one else could." "That isn't the answer we need," my father snapped. The words echoed in the chamber. He leaned forward, his fists resting on the table. "This isn't about yesterday. This is about the truth you've kept buried. That code on your skin, it ties you to something you were never meant to touch. Admit it." I stared back at him, pulse steady though my hands curled tight against my legs. Admit it. That was what he wanted. Confession, surrender, a crack in the wall I had built. But I wouldn't hand him that victory. "I won't deny my training," I said softly, "but neither will I let you twist it. That tattoo isn't a fraud. It's a marker of where I've been and what I've survived." The colonel's gaze sharpened. For the first time, I saw curiosity under the steel. My father's face, however, darkened further. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowing into slits. "You're hiding behind riddles," he spat. "You embarrassed me before this base, and now you embarrass this uniform." "No," I answered, my voice calm but heavy. "I honored it. Yesterday, when seconds mattered, I honored it. Maybe more than you wanted me to." The room stilled. Even the colonel's hands froze on the table. The recorder's red light blinked on, off, on again, marking every second of silence. At last the colonel exhaled, slow, controlled. "This inquiry is not over. Lockhart, you are confined to base until further notice. You will remain under observation, and this matter," his eyes flicked to my father, then back to me, "is far from closed." "Yes, sir," I said. The meeting adjourned, but my father didn't move at first. He stared at me as the others stood, as though trying to burn something out of me with his silence. Then he turned sharply and walked out, heels echoing hard against the floor. I sat there alone a moment longer, the red light finally dimming. I knew then, yesterday had been about survival. Today was about survival of another kind. And this storm, the one my father had set in motion, was only beginning to break. The chamber emptied, but the weight of my father's accusation lingered long after. That night, I lay awake in my quarters, the hum of the base generators leaking through the walls, like a reminder that no place here was ever truly quiet. My mind slipped back, not by choice but by force, dragged into memories I had locked away for years. I was 23 again, the air salty and sharp at Naval Air Station Fallon. The sun glared off the tarmac, blinding in the Nevada heat. I stood among a line of graduates in flight suits. Our boots polished so perfectly, they reflected the bleachers behind us. My name had just been called. Lockhart, Zara Elise. Distinguished in multi-platform tactical integration. The medal rested heavy against my chest. But what I carried inside weighed even more. The certainty that I had earned my place, not as anyone's daughter, not as an afterthought, but as a pilot who had bled and sweated through every drill. They said I had a rare ability, the way I could map a battlefield in my mind, link air, ground, and electronic warfare, as if I'd been born with antennae hidden under my skin. During the final exercises, I had coordinated a simulated strike, where F-18s, drones, and ground artillery moved as one. My instructors said it shaved minutes off what should have been impossible. That day, the tactical board had lit up with blue, and the red faded fast. When the commanding officer pinned the ribbon, he whispered, "Don't lose this, Lockhart. The Navy needs minds like yours." His words carried pride, belief, and the kind of validation I had never once received at home. But even in that moment of triumph, my eyes scanned the bleachers, looking for one face. Rows of families clapped, some waving flags, some crying behind sunglasses. Mothers hugged children, fathers saluted. Brothers and sisters shouted names into the dry wind. I searched for him, my father. The chair marked reserved, Calder Arthur Lockhart sat empty. The sight burned more than any desert sun. I had known he would not come, but part of me had hoped anyway. It was a cruel habit, that hope, always hoping he would be proud, always waiting for the acknowledgement that never arrived. He had dismissed my acceptance into Top Gun as an administrative error, said no maintenance brat of his would stand with real pilots. He told me I'd be chewed up and spat out. I had thought that maybe, just maybe, he'd want to see me prove him wrong. But his absence screamed louder than any insult. It told me he didn't care if I succeeded. He cared only that I had dared. The ceremony blurred after that. The cheering felt muffled, like cotton stuffed in my ears. I kept my posture straight, my smile locked, but inside something cracked and hardened all at once. I promised myself I would not chase his pride anymore. Yet the ink under my sleeve, the numbers and letters TG-ZO717, became my own vow. Not just a mark of where I had trained, but a reminder that even if the man who gave me his name denied me, the sky had not. Top Gun had. The number was mine, earned and etched forever. The flashback shifted, cockpit drills, endless nights poring over tactical manuals. My voice steady on comms as squadrons moved under my direction. "Lockhart, you're seeing it before the rest of us. one instructor said during a radar simulation. Like you're reading the board before it's drawn. I wore the praise carefully, knowing too much of it would only make my father angrier if word reached him. But in those moments, I felt alive in a way no empty chair could take away. I had belonged. The memory snapped back to the present, the dim lamp on my desk casting a narrow cone of light. My quarters felt smaller, suffocating. My father's words from the meeting circled like vultures. False claim, misrepresentation, admit it. He hadn't been there when I earned it. He hadn't seen the drills, the bruises, the exhaustion, the triumph. And now, years later, he wanted to erase it, as though absence gave him authority over memory. I pressed my hand against the ink on my arm. For a moment, I felt the heat of Fallon's sun again, the weight of the metal, the hush of the officer's whisper. That was the truth, not my father's silence, not his investigation. The truth was that I had stood among the best, and I had not broken. And if the storm gathering now wanted to strip me down, I would face it the way I had faced that empty chair. Spine straight, eyes forward, heart burning with a pride I no longer needed him to give me. The memory of Fallon had burned bright, but like all fire, it eventually dimmed beneath the weight of politics and command. What no one in that meeting room knew, what my father never forgave, was the real reason I stepped away from combat aviation. It wasn't fear of flying. It wasn't lack of skill. It was the way one mission unraveled. Not because of me, but because of a decision that came from higher up. A decision that turned into a scar carried by every survivor. We had been tasked with escorting a medevac convoy out of hostile territory. The map was simple enough. 2 valleys, 1 extraction zone. A timetable tight enough to make your lungs seize. My recommendation was clear. Divert through the northern pass. High risk of turbulence, but low risk of ambush. I had studied the terrain for days, cross-checked intelligence with drone sweeps. But at the briefing table, the commanding officer overruled me. Southern pass is faster, he said. Speed over caution, that's the order. We obeyed. Orders weren't requests. The first 10 minutes were textbook. Jets overhead, helicopters sweeping low, ground teams moving fast. Then came the missiles. They hit from both ridgelines, fire carving the sky open. The southern pass had been seeded with manpads, something the intel had missed or ignored. The convoy scattered. I still hear the alarms shrieking in my headset. The pilot's voice breaking over the radio. Taking fire, engine out, going down. We lost 2 birds. 1 medevac didn't make it through. The men inside had names, families, lives. And all I could think about as the smoke rose was that I had known this would happen. I had called it. And yet, in the official record, the mission was stamped with the words, pilot support. Zara Lockhart, I argued. I filed reports. I begged for the chain of command to acknowledge that we had followed a flawed order. But the military machine grinds slowly, and it grinds down anyone who refuses to stay silent. Instead of justice, there were whispers. Lockhart hesitated. Lockhart lacked conviction. Lockhart isn't suited for combat. Every corridor I walked afterward felt like it hummed with those rumors. My peers avoided my eyes, or worse, looked at me with pity. I could still fly, I could still fight, but I was marked. And in a system where reputation travels faster than truth, marks like that end careers. So I did the unthinkable. I requested reassignment, maintenance division, support operations, the kind of work no one fights over because no one notices. I told myself it was a tactical retreat, a way to avoid getting dragged into politics that had nothing to do with flying skill and everything to do with ego. But I knew what it looked like on paper. Zara Lockhart, once Top Gun, voluntarily walking off the flight line. To my father, that was betrayal. He didn't see the nuance, the suffocating politics, or the reality of being ground down by command decisions beyond my control. To him, war was simple. You fight, you win, or you die trying. Anything less was dishonor. And in his eyes, I had chosen dishonor with my own signature on the reassignment request. When I came home on leave after the transfer, he didn't greet me with a hug. He didn't even shake my hand. He looked at the uniform I wore, support insignia instead of fighter squadron patches, and said, "You quit. I don't raise quitters." His words landed harder than any missile ever had. For years after, he refused to discuss the subject. When others in the family tried to defend me, he cut them off. Failure is failure. Don't dress it up. His belief in strength was absolute, forged in decades of combat tours. To him, dignity came only through endurance and visible victory. The idea that I had stepped aside to protect myself, to protect my conscience, was unacceptable. What he never grasped was that walking away had been the harder choice. Staying would have meant watching more decisions like that one play out, knowing I'd be powerless to stop them. Staying would have meant becoming complicit. Leaving was the only way I could keep my integrity intact. But integrity doesn't show up on medals. It doesn't appear in after-action reports. And so in his eyes, I had failed. That judgment, silent and constant, hardened into something I carried like lead in my chest. It shaped every word between us. It filled every silence at family dinners. It was the shadow behind his glare in that meeting when he demanded answers about TG0717. He wasn't just asking about a tattoo. He was asking if I still had the right to wear his name. The truth was complicated, but in his world, complications were excuses. And I knew, as the echoes of that failed mission replayed in my head, that I had been fighting two wars ever since. One in the air, and one at home, against a man who believed he had the right to define what strength meant. The meeting with the colonel and my father had left the air around me charged, heavy, almost impossible to breathe. They thought I would stay on the defensive, justifying, explaining, letting them strip me layer by layer until there was nothing left but the shadow of what I once was. They were wrong. That night, alone in the barracks with the hum of fluorescent lights above me, I made a decision. If my father wanted a war, I would give him one, but not the kind fought with missiles or maneuvers. This battle would be waged with truth, records, and the rules he had always claimed to honor. I began with what I knew best: data. Every order left a footprint, every reassignment, every interference, every whispered phone call between my father and someone in command left fragments behind. My years in logistics had taught me that paper trails never vanish. They scatter. All you need is patience and the discipline to piece them back together. I logged into old networks, digging into archived records with the same precision I once used to track fuel consumption on combat sorties. I found requests stamped with his initials, special authorizations bypassing standard procedure. Some looked routine at first glance, but when paired with after-action reports, patterns emerged, missions redirected, pilots shuffled like pawns, entire squadrons reshaped because he thought he knew better. I traced emails where his language dripped with influence, for the good of the unit, for the honor of the service. To him, honor was a shield against scrutiny. To me, it was a smokescreen. I collected copies quietly, storing them on encrypted drives, careful to never access the same file twice from the same terminal. But documents were only part of the fight. The system had rules, and I needed to learn how to weaponize them. That's when I reached out to a military lawyer, a major with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She met me in an unmarked office near the airstrip, where the blinds stayed shut and the clock ticked too loudly. "You know who you're going up against?" she asked after scanning the first folder of evidence. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't waver. "My father." She exhaled through her nose, the kind of sound lawyers make when the case is already giving them a headache. Colonel Lockhart has decades of service behind him. Medals, command citations. People don't want to believe men like him abuse the system. They'll call it strategic discretion. Unless I show them it's more than discretion, I countered. It's manipulation. It's control. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "You'll need more than internal records. If you want Congress to hear this, you need a paper wall so high no one can climb over it." That became my mission. When I wasn't on duty, I was at my desk with files spread like battle maps. I built timelines cross-referencing his decisions against outcomes, highlighting every time his interference had cost lives, trust, or careers. I didn't just want to expose him. I wanted to prove, beyond denial, that his rigid belief in control had corroded the very structure he claimed to protect. At night, when exhaustion pulled at my eyes, I forced myself to stay awake. I could almost hear his voice in the back of my head, telling me I was weak, that I was wasting my time, that no one would ever side with me against him. I used that voice as fuel. Every doubt became another reason to press forward. When I finally stepped back and looked at what I had gathered, it wasn't just a pile of papers. It was an arsenal: orders with his signature, emails with his tone, reports with outcomes tied directly to his decisions. Even a memo recommending my reassignment, phrased so carefully it read like concern, but carried the weight of exile. The lawyer reviewed it all, her pen tapping against the margin of each page. "It's solid," she said finally. "Enough to file a formal complaint through military channels. Enough to reach the oversight committee if we keep pushing." I asked her what would happen if we won. "You'll clear your name," she replied, "and you'll bring him down." The words should have felt like triumph. Instead, they lodged heavy in my chest. This wasn't about victory. It was about survival, the survival of truth, of the reputation I had bled to build, of the small voice inside me that refused to accept silence as the price of loyalty. I walked out of that office into the night air. Planes roared overhead, and for a moment I tilted my face toward the sound, remembering what it felt like to fly without shadows chasing me. I wasn't there yet, but I was preparing. I was readying my counterstrike. And for the first time in years, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt momentum. The day before the hearing, the corridors of the Pentagon seemed narrower than ever, their beige walls pressing in like silent witnesses. I had spent the night revising my case, rehearsing answers, drilling myself to stay calm. The folders in my hand felt heavier than steel. I thought I was ready for anything until I saw him waiting for me at the bend of the hall. My father. He stood with his hands behind his back, posture rigid, eyes colder than the marble floor. Time had not softened him. Rank had carved him into stone. His uniform looked immaculate, not a thread out of place. For a moment, I was 23 again, standing at attention in front of him, waiting for a nod of approval that never came. "Zara," he said, voice clipped, commanding. "This is your last chance to walk away." I stopped a few feet from him, gripping my folders tighter. Walk away from what? From truth? From everything you've buried? His jaw tightened. From ruining yourself. From dragging our name into the mud. "You think the committee will celebrate you for this? They'll see an ungrateful daughter desperate for attention." I almost laughed, but it came out hollow. Attention. I didn't spend years in the shadows for attention. I left flying, I hid in logistics. I kept my head down while others wore medals. Don't call this desperation. Call it survival. He took one step closer, his shadow falling across me. "I built this family's reputation. Decades of service, sacrifice, blood, and command. Do you think you can tear it down with a stack of memos and your stubborn pride?" I raised my chin. "No, I don't think. I know. Because those memos don't lie. Orders don't lie. You rewrote missions, gambled with lives, turned service into your personal chessboard. I was there when men paid the price for your decisions." For the first time, a flicker of something crossed his eyes. Annoyance, maybe, or the faintest trace of doubt. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He leaned in, his voice a low warning. "This is your last chance to stop. If you withdraw now, I can make it disappear. You'll keep your uniform, you'll keep what little name you've earned. But if you go forward—" "Then what?" I cut in. My voice surprised even me, steady, strong. "You'll disown me, pretend I never existed. You've already done that once. You ignored me at my graduation. You abandoned me after I left the cockpit. You've made a career out of pretending I don't measure up. What more can you take?" He froze at that. For a moment, the hallway was silent but for the hum of fluorescent lights. His expression hardened again, but the silence between us carried the weight of a truth we both knew. I was no longer the cadet waiting for his approval. "I gave you one chance to stand down," he said finally, each word sharp as a blade. "You'll regret this. Not today, not tomorrow, but when you realize you've traded loyalty for self-destruction." I shook my head slowly. "No, father. I traded silence for justice. I already regret the years I stayed quiet. That was my mistake. And I don't make the same mistake twice." His lips pressed into a thin line, the kind of line commanders draw before signing an order. He didn't answer, just stepped past me, his shoulder brushing mine like a dismissal. The scent of starch and leather trailed after him, a reminder of everything he had been, everything he still clung to. I stood in the hallway long after he was gone, folders pressed against my chest. The doubt he had tried to plant didn't vanish. It never did. But beneath it, something stronger grew. Resolve. This confrontation wasn't just a warning, it was confirmation. He was afraid. And if he was afraid, it meant I was on the right path. When I finally moved again, the echo of my boots followed me down the corridor, steady, deliberate. The sine wave of emotion had dipped low, dragging me into the shadows of doubt and memory, but I knew what was coming. The spike, the hearing, the moment where all the secrets and scars would be forced into the light. And when that moment came, I would not back down. The hearing room was colder than the corridors had been. Rows of stern-faced committee members sat beneath the heavy lights, their nameplates gleaming on the long table. Cameras recorded everything, the little red dots blinking like reminders that no word could be taken back. I walked in with my folders pressed against my chest, my uniform crisp but my pulse steady. I reminded myself of one thing. I had already survived worse. My father was already there. He sat beside the colonel, his ribbons and medals reflecting like shields, his posture unshakable. When he looked at me, it was not as a daughter, but as an adversary. The chair recognized him first. General Lockhart, one of the committee members said. "You may begin." He rose smoothly, unfolding his words with the precision of a man who had rehearsed every syllable. "This committee must understand," he began, his voice confident and measured, "that my daughter, Zara Lockhart, has never been fully capable of the duties expected of her. She has long exhibited tendencies of recklessness and defiance. Her recent actions in commandeering an F22 without authorization confirm this. She placed lives at risk, endangered classified operations, and acted far outside her assigned role as a maintenance technician." He let his words hang, and the weight of his authority filled the room. Murmurs rippled across the observers seated in the back. To them, he was not just a father. He was a decorated officer, a man whose record stretched across decades. His condemnation carried the weight of a verdict. When the chair motioned to me, I stood slowly. My knees did not shake, my voice did not break. "With respect, committee members," I began, "what you just heard was not a testimony of fact. It was an attempt to erase evidence, to preserve reputation at the cost of truth." I opened the first folder, sliding radar printouts across the table toward the aides. Exhibit 1, radar logs from the night of the crash. These confirm my maneuvers and precise coordination with the rescue helicopter. Every movement was consistent with protocol, not reckless improvisation. I let them study the sheets before I moved to the next. Exhibit 2, flight logs. While officially listed as a technician, my records will show over 200 logged simulator hours, logged and signed by certified instructors. My familiarity with the F-22 was not coincidence. It was training, documented. I paused, glancing at my father. His jaw twitched, but he kept silent. I continued pulling out statements. Exhibit 3. Testimonies from fellow pilots who heard my commands during the rescue. You'll see here, I tapped the document. Lieutenant James confirms I coordinated heat readings to identify a safe landing zone. Captain Ruiz testifies that without my input, the injured pilot would not have been retrieved alive. The murmurs in the room shifted. They were listening now, the tide beginning to turn. My father adjusted his collar, his calm facade showing its first crack. Finally, I reached for the flash drive. The aide inserted it into the monitor, and the screen behind the committee flickered to life. Exhibit 4, I said. Video footage from the cockpit during the rescue. The recording showed what I had seen that night. The canopy reflecting streaks of light, the radar pulsing, my voice steady over comms. They heard me warn of crosswinds, correct altitude, direct the helicopter with clarity and precision. The video ended with the successful extraction of the injured pilot. Silence followed, broken only by the hum of the projector powering down. I turned back to the committee. I did not steal that aircraft for glory. I flew it because a man's life depended on it, and because the procedures I knew could make the difference. This was not recklessness. This was duty. The kind of duty I was trained for, and the kind I will never turn away from. One of the members leaned forward. General Lockhart, do you contest this evidence? My father rose slowly. His face was tight, His voice strained for the first time. Evidence can be misleading. Logs can be forged. Testimonies can be manipulated. What cannot be ignored is that she acted outside the chain of command. That alone disqualifies her. I met his gaze directly. Sometimes the chain of command breaks when those at the top put pride before principle. I acted because hesitation meant death. You taught me once that soldiers protect lives above all else. I only did what you told me, what you forgot. The room stayed still, the weight of my words pressing down like a storm about to break. I lowered my hands, steady, knowing the spike was coming. Whatever they decided, the truth was already out. The silence after my last words stretched long enough to feel like another battle. I could hear the faint hum of the lights, the shifting of papers, the small cough of one committee aide. My father kept his jaw locked tight, refusing to look at me. I thought the session might end in deadlock, with neither side giving ground. Then the colonel spoke. He leaned forward, his elbows pressed to the polished wood, his eyes fixed not on me, but on my father. His voice was calm, deliberate, but it carried like a challenge across the chamber. General Marcus Lockhart, allow me to ask you one thing, he said. If what we've just seen and heard, her radar coordination, her tactical precision, her command composure under duress, if this is what you consider incompetence, then tell me, what does excellence look like? The words hung in the room like a strike across the table. For the first time, my father flinched. A ripple of quiet gasps spread among the audience. Some members of the committee exchanged glances. Their pens paused mid-note. It was not just a question. It was a blade slid between the armor of his reputation. My father's lips parted, but no sound came. He adjusted his tie, tried to summon that old commanding tone, but hesitation betrayed him. I knew him well enough to recognize the truth. He had no answer. For years, he had believed authority itself was the measure of excellence. Now the committee was asking him to define it, and the evidence I laid down had already spoken louder than his pride. The chair cleared her throat. We have heard the testimonies. We have reviewed the evidence. The matter now moves to deliberation. The committee withdrew briefly, leaving the room tense and hushed. My father's eyes finally met mine, a storm behind them. He did not speak, but his silence carried every unspoken word. Betrayal, humiliation, disbelief. I sat straighter, my hands still, my breathing even. I was not here to win against him. I was here to reclaim what was mine. Minutes later, the committee returned. The chair spoke with authority sharpened by consensus. This hearing finds the actions of Zara Lockhart to have been in accordance with the highest standards of military duty. Her initiative and tactical execution during the F22 operation saved a life and demonstrated advanced leadership skills. The room stirred, but she continued without pause. Conversely, we find evidence of misconduct in General Marcus Lockhart's repeated interventions into his daughter's career, including suppression of her training records and unauthorized recommendations against her advancement. Such actions compromise not only her professional standing, but also the integrity of command oversight. I felt the weight shift, the air itself tilting in my direction. My father's face went pale beneath the lights, but the chair pressed forward. Accordingly, this council rules for disciplinary demotion of General Marcus Lockhart. Effective immediately, his rank will be reduced, and his authority curtailed. Zara Lockhart is hereby restored to full operational status and is appointed to serve as Tactical Coalition Training Officer, with oversight for Joint Force combat readiness. The words struck like thunderclaps. My father's shoulders stiffened, but he did not rise. The colonel gave me the briefest nod, an acknowledgement, not a victory cheer. Around the room, aides scribbled notes, observers whispered. I remained seated, though every part of me wanted to breathe deeper, to exhale years of silence. My father finally stood, his chair scraping across the floor. He opened his mouth, but the chair lifted her hand. This ruling is final, General. The vote was unanimous. His jaw clenched. He gave a stiff salute to the committee, but he did not look at me again. His boots echoed against the floor as he walked out, leaving only the shadow of his presence behind. The colonel turned toward me once the door shut. Lockhart, he said simply, you just rewrote the manual today. Don't waste what you've earned. I rose then, my folders still in hand. though they felt lighter now. "I don't intend to waste a second," I answered. The committee adjourned, the gavel striking once, final and sharp. Reporters outside waited with questions, but their noise felt distant compared to the quiet certainty settling inside me. I had been accused, diminished, silenced, and doubted. But in that room, before the highest oversight, truth had forced its way through. I walked out not with triumph, but with clarity. I was no longer just the technician, no longer the daughter under the shadow of a name. I was Zara Lockhart, restored, recognized, and tasked with shaping the next generation of warriors. And though my father's silence would echo long after, it no longer had the power to define me. The reversal was complete. I never imagined that vindication would feel this quiet. No trumpets, no applause, no resounding echo of victory marching me forward. Just silence, the kind of silence that presses into the air after the storm, when the clouds part and the wreckage lies still. I did not crave a noisy triumph. I wanted truth, and truth rarely arrives with fireworks. That night, I walked to the supply hangar on the edge of the base, where the smell of jet fuel always mixed with dust and grease. The place was empty, the kind of empty that feels earned after weeks of tension. I sat on an old steel crate and pulled the heavy watch from my wrist. For years I had worn it like armor, the kind of weight that reminds you of the minutes you're racing against. I set it down beside me. For the first time, I wanted to feel time pass without measurement. I looked at my wrist, bare, pale, where the strap usually covered. And there it was, the mark that started this storm. The tattoo, TG0717. A string of letters and numbers that once made me lower my sleeves and avoid questions. It had been my secret, my shield, and my burden. Now it was my reminder. I traced the edges of the ink with my thumb. The lines had blurred with age, softened by skin and sweat, but the meaning still burned. TG0717 was not just a code. It was the day I stood in the simulation hall at Top Gun, when they pinned recognition on me for tactical integration, even as my father stayed away. It was the squadron designation of the mission that taught me failure isn't the end. And now it was the symbol that the world had seen me for what I was, not for what my father claimed. I thought of how he looked when the committee voted, the stiffness of his shoulders, the silence that followed him out. He had been reduced, not by me shouting, not by me lashing out in anger, but by me standing still, holding evidence, and letting the truth speak. I didn't need to raise my voice to win. I needed only to rise when everything tried to keep me on the ground. The hangar echoed with small sounds, the creak of metal, the distant howl of the wind slipping under doors. My body finally felt the exhaustion I'd ignored through days of preparing files, rehearsing testimony, staring down the man who raised me. It was strange that after all the turbulence, I felt no rush of revenge, no glee in seeing him fall. Instead, I felt a simple exhale, a release of air that I'd been holding in since I was 23. I let my eyes close and pictured the faces of those who stood beside me, the wingman whose testimony carried weight, the legal officer who walked me through clauses I had never thought I'd use, the colonel who asked the question that changed everything. Their voices stitched together the silence that now wrapped me. My father's words still cut. I will not pretend they didn't. He had called me unfit, incompetent, a disappointment. Those words will live in me, not as chains but as scars. And scars, I've learned, are not weaknesses. They are proof of healing. I picked up the watch again, fastened it back to my wrist, then tugged the sleeve over the tattoo. Not to hide it, no. This time it wasn't about hiding. It was about carrying it privately, like a compass I no longer needed to prove existed. TG0717 was mine. It no longer belonged to whispers or suspicions. As I left the hangar, the night air was cool, filled with the faint hum of generators. The sky above stretched black and infinite. My steps were steady, my silence loud enough to fill the world. I had stood up, and that was enough. Morning light spread across the base like a thin golden film, touching the corners of hangars, sliding down the tails of aircraft, and catching in the windows of the headquarters. The day after the hearing, the air seemed sharper, easier to breathe. I walked down the corridor of the hall where everything had unraveled and rebuilt itself. My boots echoed, but the sound no longer felt heavy. The colonel waited at the end, his uniform pressed, his expression carved with both gravity and warmth. He extended his hand, a gesture simple yet weighty. When our palms met, his grip was firm, steadying. He leaned closer, his voice low but resolute. "Lockhart, don't bury yourself anymore. The sky still has room for you." I nodded, words catching in my throat before they could become sentences. That was the kind of man he was. He didn't give speeches, he gave direction. And that direction carried more than an order. It carried a blessing. For years, I had buried myself in silence. Silence in classrooms, silence in briefings, silence at family tables where my father's voice always dominated. I thought that quietness would keep me safe. But silence without courage is only another form of surrender. Now, silence was different. Silence was the ground on which I chose to stand. Calm, deliberate, unshaken. I stepped outside, past the entrance, past the cameras still lingering for statements. I offered none. I walked through the gates toward the runway. The wind was alive there, carrying the scent of jet fuel and metal. Planes waited, sleek and restless, like caged hawks. The concrete stretched wide and endless beneath my feet. I lifted my sleeve again. The afternoon light struck the ink on my wrist, glinting against the scarred lines. For the first time, I let it stay uncovered. Let the world see what I carried. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't rebellion. It was acceptance. The motif was complete. Tattoo, silence, rising. The mark reminded me that I had been tested and I had endured. The silence told me I didn't need to shout to be heard. Rising reminded me that every fall, every dismissal, every accusation was just a prelude to standing again. I thought about my father, not with hatred, but with a weary kind of compassion. His belief in honor had calcified into something brittle. He had measured love by achievement and loyalty by submission. That was his tragedy, not mine. His fall was his own, but my rise didn't need to be about his failure. I reached the edge of the runway, where the world opens wide. The late sun painted everything in bronze. My boots, the steel rails, the horizon. I inhaled, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like borrowed air. It felt like mine. This was not a victory parade. It was quieter than that, stronger than that. Closure doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives with the decision to walk forward, even when you're tired, even when the world doubted you, even when the people closest to you tried to chain your steps. I stood for a while, letting the light spill over me. Then I smiled. Not for the cameras, not for anyone else, just for myself. The colonel was right. The sky still had room. And this time, I would not run from it. Before we say goodbye, I want to leave you with this. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. Remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. I turned, the last of the day's light brushing across my bare wrist. And then I walked forward, steady, calm, unafraid.